All right, day 4 of my 30-day challenge to vlog every day about a different topic. I'm sitting here with David, the man. We're sitting on it's Songkran. It started. We're on the balcony, about to attempt Power Hour. Look that one up. It's a good one. It's a fun one. The topic today is going to be on uh, subjectivity and this realization I had a couple of years ago, where I was on the train and I was sitting there, and I realized that I may be the only conscious person in the world, and that everybody else around me could be a robot. And that sounds really crazy at first, but when you think about it, the reason we think other people are conscious is because they empathize with us, they kind of look like us, they act like us, they respond to us. But all of that stuff can kind of be trained into like a robot to, you know, to deceive us, to make us think that things are conscious when they're not. So it's this idea of are other humans conscious? Coming from a philosophical perspective, what's your take on that, David?
I mean, I'd say it's a tough one because it somewhat makes sense to believe that other people would react similar like we do, are conscious. But on the bottom line, we cannot know for sure. Because the only thing we know that is we are conscious. I see the world from my perspective. The moment I sleep, I'm not aware of anything. But I don't know, maybe Patrick is a robot, an alien, or
And the thing about it is we never know, right? We assume that that's not the case. I assume David's not a robot, and it's easy to kind of dismiss it. But we're getting to the day and age where machines are getting very, very good. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of innovation going on in technology where you can be the human mind can be completely tricked into thinking that it's a human talking to them when it's actually just an AI, like Google's response to their like doing phone calls for you, where they do phone calls and people think that it's actually a human when it's really just a computer talking to you.
And when it comes to AI, there is an interesting thing, the Turing test. Because how can we really know if a machine has intelligence or consciousness? We can't. But the moment we, as the outsider, cannot tell whether the person is replying or a machine is replying, that moment we actually can reasonably assume that there is some level of consciousness or intelligence there, not consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, and like I was talking about yesterday a little bit. I mean, what is consciousness? You know, how would you define it and whatnot? But it's this interesting idea how subjectively we have all these views, and whenever we think of the world, we try to think about you know, the universe and how is there a higher power or any of this stuff. We're doing it purely through our subjective lens because we can't escape our subjective experience ever. Yeah. It's impossible. It's this difficult kind of this like infinite loop, because whenever we talk about objectivity, we're still doing it through the lens of subjectivity.
True. We had an interesting discussion yesterday in the sauna, because before we were sitting on the sofa, Charlotte, Patrick, and we were talking about how we grew up as children. And even though we come from a similar Western background, I have absolutely no idea how it is to grow up in real rural America, where the next house is a mile away or even further, and you're just out in the wild. And no matter how many movies I would see, how often Patrick would tell me a story, I never had this experience, and I can never really 100% perceive the world the same.
Yeah, and I had a kind of a realization like that a few times, but one of them was when I was taking ayahuasca a couple of years ago in Peru, where you can only understand people to the level that they can communicate with you, right? So humans use language and body language and spoken language and, you know, emotions to communicate, but it's a very imperfect form of communicating our consciousness to each other, right? And that's why a lot of disagreements happen and whatnot, because not only just we have different outlooks on the world, but we can only communicate very imperfectly, right? And in theory, if everybody could communicate their consciousness to the other person perfectly, everyone would understand each other perfectly, right?
And problem solved. And they say pretty much all the arguments or discussions we have are due to the words we use. And actually misunderstandings or miscalculations in most of the time, because afterwards you figure out, oh, his point of view is not that different of mine, but they use different words or different ways how they want to achieve that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's a good show, Black Mirror, that goes through a lot of these kind of philosophical points. But yeah, that was just a general point that you never really know what else is conscious, whether it's other animals, other humans, and humans are very easily tricked into thinking something is there when it may not actually be. And that's a really mind-blowing point that if you really think about it, it was mind-blowing to me, at least.
It's true.
You can't escape your own subjective experience. And I think there will be a day and age where we'll be able to produce something that looks like a human, exactly like a human, responds like a human, talks like a human, that most humans will be unable to distinguish it from a quote unquote actual human, if that is indeed the case, that I'm not the only conscious one in the world.
Yeah. But in case you're just the only conscious person, the thing you make up, that's really crazy stuff. So that definitely should work and cover the other things as well. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, you have anything else to say on that, or that's the end?
That's the end.
That's pretty much it. So with that, happy SongCon, everybody. See you tomorrow.